Good morning and welcome to Kentucky Newsmakers from WKYT. I'm Bill Bryant, and what a week it has been. Later, some of Senator Mitch McConnell's speech announcing that he won't run again. And we're talking with Bluegrass Airport CEO Erik Frankl about aviation safety and the future of Lexington's airport. But first, Kentucky is reeling from another natural disaster hitting the Commonwealth. The weather claimed the lives of at least 15 people after devastating flooding and bitter cold gripped the state this week. Now the recovery for communities hit so hard back in 2021 and 2022 is beginning once again. Governor Beshear spent time this week with emergency leaders coordinating the state's response, also visiting with families who were evacuated to Jenny Wiley State Park. And this week the governor talked about the process to get these families the help they will need to rebuild.
We need an uncapping of the limitations on responding to natural disasters that was in this last budget for the first time, we think, ever. And then are going to need some form of safe fund to help in the aftermath, especially for cities, counties, and a couple of schools. But only positive things that I'd say right now, waiting to get feedback from them and wanting it to be a collaborative process. Because many of our legislators in leadership live in some of the counties that have been impacted. When it comes to FEMA, you'll see criticism that's out there, but I want to separate some of that by the phase in the work they do. FEMA is very good, in my opinion, in the search and the rescue phase. They have surged resources here and elsewhere. They bring in additional teams, and our people out in the state don't necessarily see that because they're not looking at the patch on someone's arm that's putting them in a boat and bringing them to safety. They're just grateful that they're getting to safety. But they are here, and they are helping with that. And they make it so much easier to bring in outside resources. So in terms of saving lives, I think FEMA does a very good job and is very helpful for us here. I think where you've seen the criticism and some of the tough issues we faced in the past are when individual assistance opens up, how difficult it is to manage that process. FEMA did make 4 to 5 major changes on the ground in 2022 that helped, including moving some people from what they call the National Processing Center to on the ground. I strongly believe that final decisions need to be made on the ground, and that avoids that position where a FEMA representative looks at someone and says, your application looks good, and then it ultimately gets denied. And for somebody who's been through the worst, that's tough. But a lot of these restrictions have been put on FEMA by Congress and what their expectations are in terms of how it'll go. Listen, when individual assistance is approved, it means our families can qualify for money. And so while that comes with a difficult process, bring on the process. I mean, I hope we can make it easier. I hope we can make good changes this time, but I want our people to be able to at least seek dollars that will help them.
Hard to believe we're dealing with this situation again. Joining us with some perspective, WKYT Chief Meteorologist Chris Bailey. First, give us some perspective on this particular flood situation.
This is one of the most widespread flood events you're ever going to find in Kentucky. On last Saturday night, at the height of this, we had all 120 counties in Kentucky that were under a flood warning or a flash flood warning for the first time that I can ever remember seeing. I've never seen that wide of a flood event. It wasn't just centered on one particular area. In 22, it was more of a flash flood that hit southeastern Kentucky and, 7, 8 counties. This was all 120 counties that experienced at least some flooding. And Bill, when you're talking about historic crests on parts of the Leviza Fork of the Big Sandy, sections of the Cumberland, they may not have reached the historic levels. The Big Sandy hadn't been that high since 1984. Yeah. Same for the Kentucky River and Hazard.
Well, and it was out on the Green River and out around Bowling Green. They had the most rain.
Western
right?
Kentucky. Yeah. Look at a map we've got that shows the rainfall numbers from last weekend. As bad as things were in the southeastern Kentucky, and we know they were devastating, they were deadly, we picked up some of the lower amounts of rain across the entire state. Now, granted, in the mountains, it doesn't take as much rain. But if for some reason that would have shifted east 150 miles with the heavier rains. Bill, goodness gracious, what would 7-8 inches of rain done down there? That would have doubled what they were seeing in terms of rainfall.
The problem may have been they were primed for it because we'd had the snow, we'd had the runoff from all of that.
That's right, and they had had flooding conditions on more than one occasion in the roughly 10 days leading up to that. So the creeks, the streams were already running up. The rivers were already swollen. They weren't in flood yet, but they were awfully close. So it didn't take much to just get them over the edge and into flood.
You know, is there an amount that streams or rivers normally can deal with before there's flooding? Or, you know, it seems to me when we start hearing over 3 inches of rain, you have issues.
Absolutely you do. And it all depends on, too, just how wet or dry the ground is preceding that 2 or 3 inches of rain. You know, you get a 2 to 3 inch thunderstorm in the summertime where you've got everything growing out there. Well, that growing process takes up some of that water. But this was February. This was the middle of February. There's nothing growing. So everything that was out there, Bill, just immediately runs off into those creeks and streams.
Let's try to put this winter in some perspective. It's been very tough. We've had the ice and the snow and the flooding and the bitter cold.
Yeah, this has been as harsh of a winter as you're ever going to find in Kentucky, especially in modern times. And I'm not just talking about the snow or the cold, but when you throw that historic flooding in there, you got to go back to those winters of the late 70s, where you had 4 winters in a row that were considered among the harshest you're ever going to find around here. And if you recall, too, in December of 78, big flooding.
Yes.
In the middle of what was a harsh pattern of winter weather as well. So you got to go way back to find something similar to this year.
I can remember the same kinds of decisions having to be made with schools back then, you know, about extending days and going extra days and all of that.
And we were talking, you know, earlier this week, the term calamity days making a comeback.
Remember that, yeah.
We grew up hearing about calamity days in the late 70s and early 80s. Those had gone by the wayside until recently.
A few seconds left. I guess severe weather season is on the horizon now.
It is. You know, and March, obviously, is a rough and tumble month around here. March has given us, over the past 15 years historically, some of the worst weather, from deadly tornadoes to snowstorms to ice to flooding. I don't know that this March is going to be any different. I think the first part of the month, Bill, we got to watch for more winter weather, and then boom, we go right into severe weather season, I think, quickly.
It's going to be busy.
It is.
All right. Our Chief Meteorologist, Chris Bailey, here at WKYT with some perspective. Now, we're coming right back with Erik Frankl from Bluegrass Airport. Some perspective on aviation, what's going on out there right now, and on the airport here locally. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. Bluegrass Airport in Lexington is busy and getting busier. Many love its convenience and its connections. Erik Frankl is president and CEO at the airport, and he recently received a prestigious national honor for his nearly 40-year career, including 15 years at Bluegrass. Frankel's experience spans far beyond Lexington. He has mentored other airport executives around the country, so we can talk to him some today about Lexington's airport and the challenges starting the year for U.S. aviation. Mr. Frankl, thanks so much for coming. We appreciate it.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Congratulations on that Distinguished Service Award from the American Association of Airport Executives. It has to be quite an honor to be awarded by your peers.
Exactly, and that's probably the most impressive thing from my perspective is when you get recognized by your colleagues. That's really special, and of course I'm blessed to also have a great support system here in Lexington. We've got a great board and great staff, and that makes me able to do the things that I do both nationally and locally.
The only thing constant is change, and in 4 decades, wow, the changes you must have seen in aviation.
Oh yeah. I mean, and I don't know if this would be typical of any 40-year time frame, but when you think about 9/11 and the recession and COVID, of course, we've had an up and down industry for sure.
And let's talk about the tough year this has been in getting going for aviation. There was the crash at Reagan National, the upside-down landing in Toronto earlier this week. Other accidents have really rattled travelers' confidence right now in the system. Can you assure the flying public it's still the safe way to go?
Well, it really is. I mean, and statistically, although that doesn't really help people that are, affected by those accidents, obviously statistically it's still a safe mode of travel. And I think the industry learns from all these incidents, including the one that we had here in Lexington, and we all learn from this, and we spread it throughout the industry. We all make changes. Every sector of the industry makes changes when we hear of these unfortunate accidents. So I still think we have a lot to learn, and we have a lot of improvements to make, but it's still a very safe mode of transportation.
How thorough is an investigation of something like those particular incidents? There have been others, we know, and I think maybe that's the problem in the psyche out there right now, that every day or two there's been some report of some aviation situation when it had been a long time since there had been any. But certainly the crash at Reagan and the situation in Toronto are attention getting.
Yeah, no question about it. And as everyone knows, I mean, these are all unique situations. They're not as a common theme or a common problem that we can all look at and correct. These are unique situations at each of these scenarios, and we'll learn from all of them, and we'll make adjustments every time it happens. Again, it's not something that we just put in a book and put on the shelf. The entire industry makes changes accordingly. So, is there
ongoing discussion that after a situation like this?
Yeah, I think again, the industry, we try to let some time pass, and we don't. Again, none of us as professionals want to speculate on these things, so we really let the process take place. There's so many different stakeholders in these processes that get input, and it's completely transparent. We all learn from it, but we don't like to prejudge until we learn more facts.
Let's talk about Bluegrass Airport, and you set records in 2024, surpassing the pre-pandemic travel for the first time. What's driving the trend?
Wow, I tell you, of course, it's obviously Lexingtonians in the central Kentucky region passengers that are flying out of our airport in greater numbers than ever before. Part of it is, again, larger aircraft, more destinations that the airlines are serving, lower fares that are attractive to our passengers in our region. So it's a combination of things. I think it did surprise us, frankly, after coming out of COVID. But many of the smaller aircraft, the 50 and 70 seat aircraft, left the fleet and didn't come back after COVID. So now we have 100, 120, 150 seat aircraft that are serving Lexington, which allows more passengers and lower fares. So it's been great for Central Kentucky.
Let's talk about your market a little bit. And you say Central Kentucky, but then obviously many people come from Eastern and Southern Kentucky, and then you run into some competition with Louisville and Cincinnati.
Right.
How do you navigate all of that?
So we do have a sort of a 50 county area, particularly, I'd say to the east and to the south of us primarily. We know that even people that are south of Lexington can drive past Lexington and go to another airport, but we look at that as our region, that we're the most convenient. If the fares are right and the destinations are right, we serve that 50 county area, again, including Lexington, our region, collar counties, and then east and south of us.
You've always said that you can get there from here because the connections that are offered, but there are also a lot of nonstop flights. How important is that to Bluegrass Airport?
You know, it's interesting. We do have, I think, 18 nonstop flights. We just announced getting New York LaGuardia back in May, which we're just super happy about. Sarasota begins in April. But the other thing that we really kind of promote is the amount of destinations you can get to at one stop. And I know that may not as attractive to folks, but you can get to over 300 places around the country, around the world, with one stop out of Lexington. And I think the other part of that that's good for Lexington is, obviously we want to be able to get our community out to where they want to go, but it's really important for the rest of the world to be able to come to Lexington, and particularly, as you know, for these equine events that are worldwide in interest. So we think it's really important to be able to get to Lexington easily, and that I think it's 389 destinations we can get to with one stop is really impressive, I think, for our community.
Do you have a big market of people who want to go to New York that often? I mean,
yes. I mean,
obviously the airline thinks you do, right?
Well, and we had that direct service before COVID, and so when it didn't come back after COVID, it's been anecdotally our number one complaint request for every year since 2020, since it left. So we were really pleased that Delta brought it back. And
then Allegiant is going to just almost every market in Florida, right?
Yeah, I mean like 6 destinations, and of course they still do Myrtle Beach in the summer, and then they do Las Vegas every week as well. So it's very well served.
How do you market to an airline that maybe they might want to add a destination, or do they do the numbers themselves?
we introduced the concept to them many times about, hey, we think this is a good destination for Central Kentuckians, and here's why. Of course, once we introduce it, they will do their own analysis and determine whether that makes sense. But we know our market pretty well, and of course, if you're the airline, you're looking at markets all over the country. We focus on our market. We see what our strengths are, where our passengers tend to want to go, and then we bring that to their attention.
And what does the future look like out at Bluegrass Airport? You know, there was a time, and you may or may not be aware, but there was a discussion some years ago, probably before you got here, oh, you know, this is kind of very close to town. Let's consider going out somewhere and building a big airport. That seems to have been put on the shelf.
I think so for now. I mean, we went through a master planning process in 2022 that just ended a year ago or so, and we looked at that, and we are on a very small parcel of property, but our runway seems to be long enough to be able to meet the demands not only of today, but what we think are going to be demands 5, 10, and 20 years from now. Of course, we would have loved to have more flexibility, particularly with the runway length, but right now the airport seems to be getting the job done. We're going to have some challenges with our terminal and with parking that people are going to see this summer, that we're going to have to do some pretty significant expansion on both the parking and the terminal ultimately, because this terminal was not built or intended for, you know, these large frame aircraft. We were getting 50 and 70 seat aircraft, and that was great for Lexington for a long time. But fortunately for our community, we've gone to large aircraft, and now with the facility needs to meet that demand.
So what really would have to change?
Well, we think everything. I mean, we had a lot of
larger gates or
yes,
more?
Yeah. So I mean, we think the checkpoint is too small, the restrooms are too small, the seating areas are too small, and of course, as you know, many times the flights are coming in and leaving at the same time. So American, Delta, United, Allegiant, they're all coming and going at the same time, and it puts a lot of stress on the building, and we just don't have the space. So we will be, in fact, right now our board is looking at a terminal area plan about how we would expand and redevelop the current terminal, operating in place 24/7, 365. So it's a challenge.
What does the time frame look like for that?
Yeah, so we're going to have a better sense of that probably by June of this year. Our terminal area planners are still kind of studying options, and love to come back and talk about that, you know, in the summer. We think, again, this is going to be a multi-phase over multiple years to try to do this and obviously keep the airport operational.
And obviously there's always inconvenience with construction, so you have to plan for that, right?
But I'll tell you this, that's true, but I'll say this is one of the board's focuses. They wanted a terminal area plan that would minimize the disruption to the passenger. So the way to do that, of course, is to try to keep the existing facility in place while you're building new and then switch over. Those type of things. So we're paying close attention to really minimize that experience for the customers.
What are some things that maybe people don't know about Bluegrass Airport that, you know, when you're out there talking to groups and organizations that you tell them about what happens here that they may not be aware of?
Well, you know, I think it's a little interesting, and you know, we have this saying in our industry, if you've seen one airport, you've just seen one airport, because they're so different. And obviously we're different than Louisville and Northern Kentucky for reasons. We don't have a big cargo operation, but we do have horse transportation that comes in and out. And as you know, that's a pretty unique thing to Lexington.
Thing, right?
Yeah. But the other thing that we do in Lexington is we serve a lot of small private aviation, and a lot of the corporations, a lot of the horse farms around the community, around the region have private aircraft, and obviously we need to be able to serve not only for Keeneland, but when we have the sales, we have Breeders' Cup, and so we try to do a lot on that 1,100 acres.
Is general aviation growing?
Yeah, I tell you, again, we're going to be limited by the facilities. That's going to limit our ability to accommodate that growth, but we have a pretty robust private aviation and corporate aviation operation at the airport, and of course, we're trying to balance that with the commercial airlines at the same time. So the master plan gave us some guidance about how we should do that, how we should build the facilities to meet not only the demand of the airlines, but demand of corporate aviation and private aviation over the 20-year time horizon.
We don't have to tell our viewers out there that this has been one tough winter, and you can only imagine, trying to keep planes flying and people even getting to the airport, and then certainly the planes getting in and out has had to be a challenge. It
is. I mean, fortunately, we've got very, very good staff that are trained and we've invested in the right equipment. And it's a complicated process. We don't do snow removal as someone might see on the roads or the highways. It's a whole different process, requires different equipment, requires different training. I think our guys have done a tremendously good job this year. What happens in our industry, of course, is the airlines, we can be completely operational at the airport. It doesn't mean some other airport is. And so if an airplane's stuck at, in Atlanta that's supposed to get to Lexington, it's obviously going to disrupt the passengers. But I think we do a really good job, and we've done our best for what has been a challenging season for sure.
Do you think the airlines do a little better job these days of anticipating situations? We used to hear the tales of people, out on a runway for 2 or 3 hours, and then
yes.
a decision is finally made to cancel all of that, right? Those nightmares.
Exactly, and obviously I think the industry's gotten more sophisticated. They're more thoughtful about, and I know it's a disruption to the passengers about canceling in advance. Or delaying flights in advance so that they have the right planes and the right crews in the right locations. And I think we've gotten better overall as an industry about how to minimize that disruption. But, the storms we've had, and not only in Lexington, but around the country, it's been a challenging year.
Nearly 40 years in aviation. What still excites you about going to work every day?
That's a great question. I am amazed at this industry. I'm still amazed, you fly on an airplane that weighs several 100,000 pounds and you can get all the way to Hawaii or to Australia with nonstop. It's just a miracle. And I'm just amazed by the industry and the logistics of it, and all the different employees that are involved, and how safe the system is given all that. It just amazes me. So I'm just glad that I've had this opportunity and frankly had the opportunity in Lexington.
Yeah, well, we're glad you're here, and I hope you're going to stay some more time, obviously. And congratulations again on the award.
Thank you very much.
Erik
Appreciate it.
Frankl from Bluegrass Airport. We appreciate it. We'll be back in a moment, and we'll hear some of what Senator Mitch McConnell said when he made his decision that he is not running for another term this week. WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers will continue. Welcome back to Kentucky Newsmakers from WKYT. As you probably know, a major shakeup is coming to Washington, D.C. and to Kentucky politics. Kentucky's longest-serving U.S. Senator ever and the longest-serving party leader ever in Washington, Kentucky Senator Mitch McConnell, announcing he will not seek re-election when his term is up next year. His decision sent shockwaves throughout Kentucky politics. Several potential contenders already announcing their name or at least looking around at the possibility of running for the seat that McConnell held since 1984. Here is what Senator McConnell had to say about his decision to leave office in 2026.
I've never liked calling too much attention to today's date, February 20th. But I figured my birthday would be as good a day as any to share with our colleagues a decision I made last year. During my time in the Senate, I've only really answered to two constituencies: the Republican Conference and the people of Kentucky. Over the years, the first group trusted me to coordinate campaigns, to count votes, to steer committees, to take the majority, and on 9 occasions to lead our conference. Serving as a Republican leader was a rare and, yes, rather specific childhood dream. And just about a year ago, I thanked my colleagues for their confidence, which allowed me to fulfill it. To the distinguished members of this body, I've had the privilege to lead, and I remain deeply, deeply grateful. Today, however, it's appropriate for me to speak about an even deeper allegiance and even longer-standing gratitude. 7 times, my fellow Kentuckians have sent me to the Senate. Every day in between, I've been humbled by the trust they placed in me to do their business right here. Representing our Commonwealth has been the honor of a lifetime. I will not seek this honor an 8th time. My current term in the Senate will be my last.
There's been a lot of reaction to Senator McConnell's announcement. Here's my conversation with Congressman Hal Rogers.
Well, I wasn't surprised. He's had some health problems, but still very capable. The longest serving member of the Senate from Kentucky ever, the longest serving party leader in the Senate in history. So he really is a historical figure, but I was not really surprised. He is a legend, no doubt about that. He completely reformed the Republican Party in Kentucky and did some great things for our state. And I wish him well.
Would you say, you know, some have called him the father of the modern day Republican Party. Is that a true honor for him, you think?
I think it is. He foresaw the need in Kentucky to become more aligned with the South and changed in every county the Republican organization to where it's much more in touch.
That's Kentucky Newsmakers. Thanks for joining us. Have a good week ahead.